Hello again, welcome back to our final block, the podcast series on fund tokenization in Europe. So today I have a special guest, Nasir Zubairi. He's the CEO of the LHoFT, also a member of the EU Blockchain Observatory Forum. What are the kind of stuff that could impact Europe? While it does not necessarily come from Europe, we should watch what is going on.
The Genius Act is genius. It's potentially akin to the deal the US did in the 1970s with the Saudis around the petrodollar. The fundamental infrastructure in capital markets is changing, and if Europe doesn't do something quickly, we will become consumers of US infrastructure rather than producers of it. I think the US is looking at it more as an asset. There is growing demand for these stablecoins as a core settlement asset. This is a huge opportunity for Europe. We need to look at it as a settlement system. We need to stop discussing, we need to start acting.
Hello again, welcome back to our final block, the podcast series on fund tokenization in Europe. So today I have a special guest, Nasir Zubairi. So Nasir is the LHoFT person, he's the CEO of the LHoFT. But also very interestingly, he's also a member of the EU Blockchain Observatory Forum, which of course fits very well in our debate of today. And welcome, Nasir.
Well, thank you for having me, George.
Glad that you are here. So let's chat a little bit on what is new, what are the kind of stuff that could impact Europe, while it does not necessarily come from Europe. And I wanted to touch a little bit with you because on the Genius Act, because you mentioned that already once also to me and say, well, look, we should watch what is going on. Can you explain a little bit more your thought process when it comes to the Genius Act?
The Genius Act is genius. To me, it's potentially akin to the deal the US did in the 1970s with the Saudis around the petrodollar, guaranteeing demand, in this case, not for US dollar, but for US dollar stablecoins, ensuring liquidity and ensuring continuing debt for the US government. The fundamental infrastructure in capital markets is changing. We know that. And with the Genius Act, they are helping to propagate that infrastructure to essentially be, number one, American, number two, US dollar backed. And if Europe doesn't do something quickly, we will become consumers of US infrastructure rather than producers of it.
So maybe for our audience who maybe have not followed the Genius Act every day, so the Genius Act is the piece of legislation which allows banks to issue US dollar stable coins. And as Nasir, as you have mentioned, this stablecoin has to be fully backed up either with cash or, more interestingly, with US Treasuries. So here we go. That's a good source of financing for the US government. So a very high stake for the government. And then, very interestingly, for the banks, it is not allowed to pay back the treasury money to the consumers for different reasons, but amongst others, because we really speak here about payment rails, and on payment rails you don't pay really remuneration. So that's maybe the reason behind. But as you have mentioned, so it will give a main kind of drive again to the US dollar as be the first currency.
Yeah, it legitimizes the whole token economy in the US. And unlike Europe, be it that we were very progressive with the bringing into force the MiCA regulation, which I think has generally been very viewed positively. The legislation in the US is universal for the entirety of the US. We are still suffering a level of fragmentation, even under MiCA within Europe. Be it that the Genius Act also forbids the paying of yield on stable coins, there are other methodologies and the underpinnings of the stablecoin in the US and the advancement of US institutions in using stablecoins has gone beyond that of Europe, whereas we're still predominantly, I think, looking at tokens and stable coins, as you just said, as payment rails, as a payment instrument. I think the US is looking at it more as an asset, which I think makes a huge difference in terms of the propagation of stable coins in the market. And as I say, I think there's been very little, if anything. Well, there's SocGen, I think, and one or two other institutions have launched euro-denominated stablecoins, but there's very little traction in them, very little liquidity, whereas the likes of Circle and others, JP Morgan, etc. in the US, there is growing demand for these stablecoins as a core settlement asset. Plus, you have the other flip side of the coin is the securities market, whereas, yes, we have had a number of issues of securities in Europe. Again, the US is going a little faster with the likes of Goldman Sachs. JP Morgan, which I think is pivotal moment, I think recently announced their first tokenized money market fund. And given the role money market funds play in terms of institutional liquidity, these are all very rapid, progressive advancements to the adoption increasingly of US dollar denominated tokens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you touched already on some very rich points here. As a matter of fact, the race has started in the US. It's not only the demand, but there's a real appetite from the big players to make the market shares.
Yeah.
So, and that is what you also have described. Part of, and that of course creates its own demand. Very interesting as a feature. And then then directly connected with the ability to have this stable coin and the advantage of the technology linked to the stable coin is one that you mentioned, is money market, a big use case that is really fast growing in the US. On the other side, when it comes to collateral and money market and collateral kind of solutions, repo on cash, that I guess these are all the kind of solutions that you have in mind.
Yeah, and I think this, hopefully, and I like to believe that we here in Luxembourg have that agility to do that, is something we can seize upon, I believe. This is a huge opportunity for Europe. The money market funds are absolute critical element of capital markets infrastructure for institutions and corporates. We're just beginning to see the US dollar money market funds. JP Morgan, as I mentioned, was the first to launch a money market fund. Europe has huge depth in terms of money market funds. The opportunity here is for Luxembourg and Europe on a broader scale to move fast to start launching tokenized euro-denominated money market funds to support European institutions and corporates with their liquidity needs, to allow for faster settlement cycles, therefore ensuring that corporates have that liquidity that they need. As you mentioned, the collateral element, this would be, I think, an obvious move, as well as looking to drive the greater adoption and issuance of euro-denominated stable coins to help underpin our infrastructure. We don't want clearly to rely on American infrastructure. We see that in the attempts we are now making in Europe to fight against the dominance of the payment rails, Visa and MasterCard. Here we have to make sure that we don't do things too late, because otherwise we're going to have the same situation. But this market is moving very, very fast. We need to look at how we push forward in this euro-denominated token market. Otherwise, once again, we will be reliant on our American colleagues.
So definitely, I like the way you worked it out. Today we are relying on payment rails, even for the euro, which is US infrastructure, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and you name them. And there is the real risk of us seeing it happening again in front of our eyes for the next generation of payment system. And it's really important that we take this very seriously. I would absolutely join you in this.
Well, the interesting thing is, in some ways, you can argue that we are on a level quite innovative in that our traditional systems have to some degree dampened maybe the speed of development of euro stablecoins in the payment industry because of instant payments, right? One of the obvious advantages of a euro stablecoin would be to drive faster payment cycles, but we've implemented instant payments, which satisfies us as customers and consumers. So has therefore dampened demand. But I think fundamentally it's the framing of the issue of a stablecoin as a payment system. We need to look at it as a settlement system.
Yes, absolutely. I think, again, absolutely to the point. But for the people that say, well, we have SEPA Direct, well, SEPA Direct is not understandable in smart contracts.
Yep.
So it's a nice, isolated way to move around cash, cool, but it cannot be used in smart contracts work, and then that means delivery versus payment kind of technologies, means collateral management technologies which are automated, and so on and so on. Whenever it gets slightly more complicated, it does not really advance you. And I think that is also the other very important reason for the industry in Europe to have the possibility to run on then pendant of US stablecoin, which would be the Euro stablecoin. Now, you have also mentioned something which is also interesting. You said, well, maybe we should get inspired in Luxembourg, and I know we have a common fight here. I've also already tried to give that spark and say, let's reflect what we can do independently from CBDC, so the central bank money, which most probably is not going to really address the point and move rather to commercial bank money. It's very interesting that under the Genius Act, the US dollar stablecoin per se is not an official currency. It is rather something that is given to the industry to organize themselves, to organize their settlements. And then from that perspective, as you say, there is a certain genius element in this thing, because it will make things happen without giving away the full control around money, which is one of the big fears of the central banks.
Yep. Look, we have clearly seen, in my belief, although a lot of discussion around this today, huge benefits of the collaboration across the Eurozone. But with that comes certain inefficiencies. We are dealing today, and no detriment to them at all, but we are dealing today with a group of political and very senior business leaders who grew up in a period during the 1980s watching their parents suffer in high inflation, high interest rate environments. While on the flip side also being the group of individuals that arguably have benefited the most through asset inflation cycles, own most of the wealth, etc. The risk appetite in Europe has declined. People want to safeguard. There is a fear of inflation, and this is boiling over into a lot of our policy. We, in general, seem to want to eradicate, ironically, risk in its entirety from our system, which makes no sense given that one of the primary functions in the financial system is the management of risk, which is quite different from eradication of risk. And as a result, we focus so much on discussing, debating, researching, analyzing new policy adjustments to make sure that there are absolutely zero loopholes, which in my belief is a complete fallacy and impossibility. But as a result, we are too late to the game in many, many things, and restrictive on a level of innovation, and more so, we are failing to enable innovation. There is no doubt now that tokens, blockchain, will underpin the future of the financial infrastructure around the world. Yeah. So now we need to move on this, learn while we're moving, manage the risk of the deployment because we don't know everything, some things will happen, but mitigate risks that could happen, but move forward rather than continue to think and discuss endlessly about what we're going to deploy. We made a mistake already with the CBDCs. The point at which the analysis and core research and analysis was done was in a period where we had very low interest rates, where we were looking in some ways to emulate the US, wherein the US was able to deploy helicopter cash by sending out checks to everyone in the country to drive demand and growth. Europe focused on quantitative easing. They wanted an alternative alternative means of being able to stimulate. Tokens came along, the blockchain came along and said, okay, so let's do retail cash so that we can deploy money to the population easily. But that's not a user-friendly solution. You and I and people on the street don't want to be holding two wallets, right? One with the central bank, one with our normal money. And in reality offers not huge amounts of value except on the monetary policy side. Settlement, wholesale CBDC makes more sense. And now they've gone back to the drawing board and again we'll continue to discuss it. We need to stop discussing. We need to start acting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what is really important is make it usable.
Yeah.
And make it usable in such a way that it's even not perceived from a technological perspective, but from a user perspective. So the user should have an impact.
Well, as you said earlier, and we were discussing before we decided to talk here officially, but, people in the real world don't care about blockchain, tokens, gas fees, all this terminology. These are a means to an end. People want solutions, right? So we need to focus on solutions. And if the blockchain and tokens enables that, we take away that complexity to deliver those solutions, right?
Yeah. So you see also in the LHoFT fintechs also moving around this space. You try to connect the fintechs to the traditional, to Trafi world, try to ease the process, let them speak together. And there we can clearly say today, even though nobody wants to concentrate on technical matters, if you are a traditional bank, you should start to worry about knowing some more stuff around it. And there is a need for investment to create these new infrastructures because, I also agree with you, the next capital market infrastructure will be driven by this technology. But how do you see the rhythm of investment of the traditional kind of industry? And how do you assess the impact that the US dollar kind of new railing will have on the European industry, even if, in that case, even if the European regulators would not move, would we not be forced indirectly to move into all this by the fact that the biggest capital market is moving?
Yes. That's a simple answer, yes. People are moving, right? Even if it's as a subsidiary of American banks, but also the big asset managers. I've heard every major asset manager say they are working on, be it crypto funds, which obviously is related, tokenized funds, and on blockchain. The most obvious and evident of which in Luxembourg has been Franklin Templeton, who've been very, very progressive and will continue to be. The fact, the European infrastructure will rely on this. The question will be, will this be through choice and us controlling it, or will it be pushed on us through our American friends?
Yeah. That brings me to, and also when you spoke about our pros and our thought process on innovation, and say it has to be 100% safe, even though what we have even today is not 100% safe. 100% safety cannot be achieved, so it's about managing risk. I wanted to come to another announcement that was done some days ago, and which absolutely illustrates the approach or a difference of approach between the US and Europe, where the biggest clearer or the clearer in the US capital market, DTCC, got a non-action letter from SEC and stating, look, we understand that you want to go ahead on putting up the tokenized or the blockchain rails in the entire delivery versus payment wallet movements and everything you can have about a nice feature when it comes settling an entire capital markets, where they said, well, go ahead. We won't chase you for any of it, make it safe, of course, but we will not you don't need to ask us authorization for every step that you take. And I think that's pretty much coming to that point what you say. First we let it happen in a safe way, and we accommodate that rather than giving rules up front.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this risk aversion that Europe has, it's an impossible dream, right? It's absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
You know, look at it. I mean, look at the analogy of us with our children. We try and put cushions around them, but we don't literally put cushions around them. They will fall, they will get scrapes, but what we try and do is to teach them to mitigate so nothing serious happens to them, right? You and I have been around in the world of finance for long enough to have seen how many bad things have happened, right? I remember from the earliest times of me paying attention when I was still, Nick Leeson, Bearings, right? And the issues that caused through various other fallacies, obviously culminating in the financial crisis 2008. We've kind of recovered. The question is, have we recovered in a good way? I mean, where European banking used to be toe-to-toe with American banks, we are no longer toe-to-toe with American banks in any way, shape or form, right? And that's a shame, because be it that, okay, it was principally London, it still is London as the financial center, but the general power and influence that Europe has in financial markets has declined and continues to decline. Our equities markets, yes, we have listings there, but the reality is when you look at the demand for equities, it's all US based now, right? Institutional investors, yes, we have funds that focus on European equities, but the vast majority of investment is going into the US, where we've had a traditional strength in the fixed income arena, debt markets, etc. There's a number of issues there where we potentially are also going to fall behind, not least the token economy and our adoption of new infrastructure. Hopefully we still have opportunity to maybe make a drive for money market funds, because that would be critical. But then we have sort of, if I may bring in other areas such as SFDR and the issues around the rules-based economy that, issuers of debt need to comply with around sustainability, which makes us less attractive, right? We need a spark here in Europe, and we need to take this one.
No, and also coming back to the DTCC announcement, which is going to make a perfect cocktail, because on the one hand you have digital money, and now you're going to create the digital security, and then you have the perfect match. So we've done some homework on the digital security, referring to the blockchain 124 laws, which shows that the government has a clear view and has a clear appetite. Regulators are also doing more and more. So how would you then assess this Luxembourg readiness in the entire game?
Look, Luxembourg genuinely is admirable when it comes to what we have done in this area, in this emerging area. I think we have done better than practically everyone else within the Eurozone. We have created a token infrastructure economy here. We have all the pieces of the puzzle here. Now we need to leverage it in its entirety. I always say that, not me personally, quite honestly, because I know this saying and I believe in this saying, is that when we look forward, things never move quite as fast as we want, but when we look back, they move faster than we can ever imagine. And that is truly the case in Luxembourg. We've heard criticisms of regulator policy, etc., over the years, 9 years I've been here. But when we look back, Luxembourg was the first to license 2 crypto asset providers, first to authorize a credit institution to deal in crypto on behalf of its clients. We had the first fund administrator, 6 months. We have Zodia, we have Coinbase here. I mean, it's moving, right? We had the first issues of 2 large-scale bonds from the World Bank and the European Investment Bank done under Luxembourg law because we have the clearest law. We were the first sovereign wealth fund to invest in crypto assets. When we, maybe a point of pride, where people in Switzerland, Crypto Valley, were saying, Switzerland, what are you doing? Look at Luxembourg. We are doing a good job, and the policies from the government, the Minister of Finance, and what we're able to do here is come together and align and push the same storyline. And I think more is to come. I think, as I said, there are some macro pieces which we need to think about how we deal with them, because the EU is being slow at the moment. How can we push that at the EU level? Maybe there are things we can do, as we have done with the blockchain laws independently, to help drive this even faster.
Yeah, so I think we agree on that. So the government has built the motorway. So it's for sure not right now the policy that is missing. It's really the people that have the appetite to move ahead. So it's now that it's going to happen. And I think that could be our call in the market is don't think it's going to be tomorrow, it's now. And the motorway is there. Just take your car and drive. I mean, that's really the message. So Nasir, thank you very much for these insights. Really, really appreciate it. Now, as you might know or not, so we always have a little bit of a ceremony at the end as well. I'm presenting a wine, as I like wine, and this is one of my passions. And this time I've chosen not the wine because of the region, but because of a specific year. And let us have a look.
Okay, Premier Cru de Pommard, okay.
Very
nice. 2016.
Okay. 2016 was the year where you were appointed CEO of LHoFT.
That's true,
So, and I felt, and I still remember that moment, and I felt it would be a good point to make reference to that and to celebrate that moment of your appointment.
2016, George, was also the first year of the KPMG Finance Awards. And I was honored to be asked, I was pre-LHoFT, to be one of your judges, yes. If I remember correctly. Yeah. I just arrived in Luxembourg. I still remember who won as well. Do you remember who won?
Yes, governance.com.
Governance.com, yes.
And another story, which is, let's maybe first taste, and then I'll give you the other story, which I like very much.
Oh, let's have that. Ooh, wonderful. But I was going to say cheers.
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 I was just tempted. Beautiful.
Lovely.
So, yeah, it was the KPMG FinTech Awards that we've put together at the time. So there was governance.com still around today. Still a catapult winner on your initiative. Yes. Also of LHoFT trying to put Trafi and FinTech together. But there was there was one company receiving the nomination of the jury saying, please come back, we want to see you back. Do you remember the name?
I can't remember that. It was it was an AI. They did sort of trade.
It was the eToro.
Oh yes.
We had eToro there.
Yes, eToro was there. Yes.
So that's also a good story. So they were there at the time. They were already at that moment. It was for them a little bit at early stage, conceptual stage. They were not live, but the jury said, we like the idea very much. Can you come back? So that was also a cool thing.
When you look back over the past 9 years, Luxembourg has had some incredible wins, and we really should be celebrating them. Yeah, we could have done better in certain places. That's easy. Yeah. But overarchingly, the big wins, I mean, most recently, Coinbase, right? You know, I mean, look at our industry here. Amazon, PayPal. PayPal, dominant, biggest payment player, choose Luxembourg, right? And love Luxembourg. The increasing number of crypto firms that have set here, Bitflyer, Bitstamp now, obviously been taken over by a huge player, Robinhood.
Yes.
Right? Banking circle. I mean, it's really astounding what this country achieves, and we should be celebrating that, you know?
Celebrating, but also leveraging.
And leveraging, of
Be
course.
by far more really acknowledge it and really say, what can I do with it? I think that's really the point.
I mean, you know, I heard something the other day. Now, I love all these little statistical facts about Luxembourg. You know, we do play, as the LHoFT, a bit of a role, be it in support of Luxembourg for finance, sort of promoting and selling Luxembourg. And there's all sorts of little, you know, facts, fun facts I know about Luxembourg. But I heard a new one that I hadn't heard before. Did you know Luxembourg is the third country, number 3 in the list of foreign direct investment from the US? I didn't know that. That's a big deal, right?
Oh, and that's a constant one, since several years. So it's not
I didn't know
one
that one.
Yeah,
I know. You know, we do this sometimes with Luxembourg Finance. We do this map of the world. We rescale the countries based upon cross-border financial flows, and Luxembourg is number 3 there as well, right? It's huge in that. It's amazing what this country achieves. We should all be proud of it and leverage it, you know, and celebrate the wins. You know, one thing used to upset me a little bit, albeit that I'm still proudly British in many ways, disappointed with what's going on politically in the UK. But one thing that always used to frustrate me a little bit is how Britain doesn't in itself also celebrate winners. And I don't get that mentality. And I think that's the core thing that the US definitely does. Celebrate the winners. And, you know, we have great wins. Celebrate them. Let's not talk about, we didn't do this, we didn't do that.
And even treat well the losers, because that's part of the system, which is something which we tend not to acknowledge or be ready to acknowledge. So, Nasir, it was a pleasure to have you here. As a closing, maybe to our audience, we are close to New Year. Do you have a wish for New Year for Luxembourg?
A wish for Luxembourg? I wish it continued prosperity. This is my home. All my energy is focused on helping as much as I can to continue to help this country thrive. I see that same energy and enthusiasm in all those around me. Let's continue to work together. Let's not create divisions. Let's not foster doubt. Let's not foster anger and hatred. Let's foster energy, positivity to work together to drive this country forward for the next 20, 30 years.
Well, I think that's a good conclusion. It's a people's business at the end of the day.
It is a people's business.
So, thank you, Nasir. So, thanks to all of you. As you know, we have, if you like this session, we have others that we have already produced. There's more that we are going to come. And don't forget, T+0 is knocking at your door.